Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, and this is testing my patience. When I heard your voice, it was like droplets of gold. It's like, oh Jesus, man. Broderick Wallace here, companion of Set and Horus in the light of Amun, and I am very pleased to have with me Seth David Rodriguez, the creator of the Oracle of the Witch Current. So wonderful. How are you on this lovely spring evening?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the interview.
My pleasure.
I feel quite relaxed, and it's been a really nice day today. We've had a nice few days, and just enjoying the light right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this time of year is beautiful. Absolutely. And do you know what, I have two, because we're talking about cards and tarot today. I actually have two sets of tarot cards. One is the original one that I bought when I was about, I don't know, like 18, no, I think I was about 17 or something when I bought these. They've even got mold growing between them and everything. And I have a pack that I made, not to your levels that that you've gone to, but I have just the major arcana that I made myself. We'll talk about that later. But I thought, why not? We'll just shuffle. So I'll shuffle these cards, and then when you feel the moment is ready, I'll pick one, and we'll sort of make a reading for the interview. So no pressure or anything. Cool. So right, I'll start shuffling now, and we'll just see what comes up. Just waiting for your say so when you think I should stop.
Oh, okay. Stop.
And I feel it's the top one. And that is beautiful. We have temperance. So I don't think we're going to fall out.
That's
wonderful.
Good.
Okay, temperance is the word of this lovely spring evening. So put the cards down, and the book, the black book, where I've written down all the questions, because we favour low tech here. The old ways are best. So the traditional first question, I tend to just change it a little bit depending on the guest. So Seth, when did you first discover that witchcraft is a real thing?
So I would say I first discovered that witchcraft is a real thing. I kind of for definite for me personally, somewhere in the late 90s. I think it would have been maybe either 1997 or 1998. I was in high school and I was a teenager, and I'd had a couple of synchronicities that felt like I was being led to pay attention to the concept of the witch and also the pagan simultaneously. I kept hearing randomly about certain people being pagans, or oh, that person's a witch, or that person's a pagan. And then one day, like a lot of people that get into this stuff, I was a weirdo anyway. I was a misfit. Um, I was uh, I was actually a high school librarian. That's how cool I was. And so during my lunch breaks at high school, I was actually uh, doing a few shifts in the school library, and all the other kids that were also school librarians, we were all a bit weird. Um, and one of the guys there that I made friends with, one day he said to me, "Oh, I want to take you to a satanic shop in town, and I'm going to buy a Ouija board." And I thought, wow, I don't know how to feel about that. I didn't really know a great deal about it. I'd already, with these people that I was hanging around with in the library, we'd already been exploring some paranormal stuff. Like the first topic I ever got into through those people was astral projection. So we already had, I'd learnt a little bit from some of them about astral projection and spirit guides, and the head librarian. We had this. We kind of recently switched over. We used to have a head librarian that was quite an elderly lady who looked a bit like the Queen Mother, and then suddenly we had this woman in her 20s who was really cool, and she was a bit goth, and she started talking quite openly to us about how she'd had out of body experiences when she was younger. So I was surrounded by people that were talking about this stuff, and I went to this shop eventually with this friend of mine in our local town, and it turned out that it wasn't a satanic shop, it was actually a modern pagan witchcraft shop, basically. And it was in that shop that I met my first witchcraft teacher, and I just went, I got straight away, as soon as I picked up my first book, there was no turning back, and I just was very enthusiastic and very obsessed very quickly. And it was around this time when I started practicing my first rituals, that I started to have some results, both from like spells manifesting, and also just weird experiences that happen when you go into the woods at night and call out to old gods, and do weird shit, weird things happen. So yeah, it was around that time, around 97, 98.
Oh, okay, mate. And I can relate to so much of that, just sort of images of childhood in the early to late 90s. Everything's the lack of the internet made everything more mysterious, and we can never have those times of innocence back again. I mean, obviously we lacked the accessibility to so many paths and traditions and outlooks, but there's something beautiful about that limitation. Same thing with music, actually. Limitation can make you more creative. If you just got a guitar and some basic recording gear. Uh, I found that anyway, years back as a musician. And once I got Pro Tools and I could like do anything inside this computer, sometimes I just sit there like, Jesus, I sort of long to go back to the days of just simply writing on a guitar and in that punk ethic. So
Hmm.
absolutely, my friend, yeah. And talking of just sort of going into the woods, you brought back a memory there. And I've already exposed my weirdness to extreme levels anyway, so I don't think I can do any more damage. You brought back a memory of me working as a security guard. I have one of those mag light torches. I don't know if you know, they're a big metal torch that sort of doubles as a club legally, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And this used to send out a really long beam, into the night as I was patrolling, and I just felt this sudden urge to just disappear off up into a field and to the edge of a woodland. And I was shining this torch. It was like almost like a lightsaber, this long beam, just almost it looked like it was reaching the clouds. And I remember just calling out, like, just because it's that isolation, it's that lack, It's, you know, no internet at that time, no, you know, no friend group, just that calling out to the weird and hoping for an answer. And I guess the moral of the story is be careful what you wish for. Right, moving on to question 2. What is the witch current? A taxonomy in simple terms, if you please.
Okay, so I have a bit of a love for the kind of some of the old school terminology that was used by occultists like during the Victorian era, and then kind of on into like moving forward into like the 20s and 30s and 40s. I know a lot of people really dislike a lot of that kind of terminology and find it very outdated, but I always loved the word and the concept of a magical current. I've also always been kind of interested in the concept of the egregore as well. That's another term from that kind of era. And so I took inspiration from the fact that, you know, every kind of magical tradition has its own current, but the word current can be used quite broadly. It can be applied to other things. Like you can talk about the magical current of a magical order that you're initiated into, for example. Like people talk about the 93 current, you know, and all of that. But you can also talk about magical currents in the sense of the current of a deity. You know, like if you work intensely with a particular deity, you could say you're really entrenched in the current of Aphrodite, for example. And then you might extend that and say you're in the current of the red goddess if you are working in a framework where you see Aphrodite as being a part of this overarching current that other similar goddesses are connected to, like Ishtar and Inanna and Babylon. So I love the kind of I love a lot of the imagery connected to the idea of a current. I find that it's quite a evocative term for me. And the Oracle deck is one of the kind of goals of the Oracle deck was that I wanted to kind of bring everything together that I felt has been a part of the modern witchcraft movement and speak about it quite in an all-encompassing kind of way. So in many ways, I could have called it the Oracle of the spirit of witchcraft. You know, it's the same kind of thing. And I know that there's a lot of witches that talk about how witchcraft itself is like a spirit that is always around, and just like everything else, evolves and grows and changes and shifts over time. You know, just in the years that I've been involved in witchcraft, I've seen different practices and approaches and perspectives on witchcraft that come and go in and out of popularity. You know, so I wanted to kind of create this Oracle deck to track where we've been, where we come from, where all of our different roots come from, as well to help people who are new to all of this, because there are so many different iterations of witchcraft nowadays, it can be so overwhelming for people. So I wanted to create a resource where everything is there. So if you're totally new to witchcraft, you might think, what does witchcraft have to do with the symbol of the pentagram? Or what does it have to do with Hermeticism? You know, you can find a bit of a mention of that in my deck and my book, and then there's reading lists as well, so it can lead you down a path. So I just wanted to have everything kind of together in one place. So yeah, the witch current, to simplify it, I would say, is basically the spirit of witchcraft.
Wonderful. And the word current itself suggests a kind of force, almost like an electric current running, you know, from the past into the present and off into the future. And you mentioned Hermeticism there. As you were talking, because obviously this word witchcraft, I never thought about things in that way. You know, you have your weird experiences, especially in that time, you know, more isolated with less access to knowledge. And my real way in is through Hermeticism. And it was only through experiencing things from that angle that I realized that there was so much in terms of witchcraft that I could perhaps relate to with other people. My only real, apart from personal experience, my only, could you call it social? I guess you could call it social, occulted social witchcraft experience has been through through an Egyptian current, if you like.
Mm.
So, just as a quick side question, how do you see witchcraft and Hermeticism? I mean, how do those terms rub up against each other for you?
So, when it comes to Hermeticism, I think, like quite a lot of people, I've always felt a confusion around it, because when I first started hearing mentions of Hermeticism in the books that I was reading in the 90s, that were usually presented as witchcraft books, a lot of what I was gleaning from from these pages about what Hermeticism was, I later was told and have seen people say, well, that's not real Hermeticism. So there's always this distinction. People talk about, even just the other day on Instagram, I saw somebody making a post claiming that they had a better translation of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. So that I always see this kind of arguments around what even is Hermeticism. And there's that really famous text that I can't think of the name of it now. Is it the Corpus Hermeticum I'm thinking of?
Probably a
Um,
collection of various. It all gets really
yeah,
confusing. Yeah,
yeah, but I think what I understood originally to be Hermeticism, based on what I was reading, was material like the Kybalion,
mm,
and that kind of that is referred to as Hermeticism. And then also I discovered I also discovered Franz Bardon's work, although I definitely have not explored it to the extent that you have. And I'm aware that that work is referred to as Hermetics. So when it comes to Hermeticism, I'm just quite unclear, and I don't mind admitting that I'm unclear about exactly what it is. It seems to be a term that's used, that people apply to their preferred, approach. But I think of it as
absolutely.
Hermeticism. I think I just think of Hermeticism more as, and I could be wrong, but I think of it more as different systems of philosophy that you can apply to your magic, that can give a framework to magic, basically, and that there's a link with, that these teachings come from Hermes Trismegistus.
Mm, absolutely. No, interesting to get your because I almost kind of see us as on opposite sides, and I've felt that with a lot in common. I've felt that kind of friction in me in terms of where does Hermeticism stop and just you know you can't really call it plain old magic, but you know what I mean. Obviously, there's lots of modern considerations. Obviously, people who respect Franz Bardon will say, yeah, Franz Bardon, that's the real deal. To me, I could sum it up very quickly actually and say Hermeticism is closer to mysticism, and you'll be spending a lot less time making objects and um, uh, perhaps performing rituals and a lot more time in meditation actually. So
Hmm.
you might even call it boring. But of course we wouldn't. No, I love your
Hmm.
answer there, mate. Um, right, so where are we? Question 3. I've listed this as the obvious question. The obvious question, focusing upon divination. How does a pack of cards containing an image map give us glimpses into the hidden world, the personality, and possible futures?
Okay. So I'm glad that this question is one of the earlier questions, because there's like potential for me to ramble a bit here.
Please do.
So um, I think I would start by saying that I definitely don't have an answer that would satisfy scientifically minded people, or it wouldn't really satisfy people who are only focused on, who are looking for some kind of scientific explanation. and also that, when it comes to the occult in general, obviously we all read these different theories as to how things work, and I just see them all as frameworks. I've never read, studied a system and thought this is exactly how it is. I just think that's an interesting way of looking at it, and it's something that we can use as a tool. So I don't claim to really to be able to explain how tarot works, but I feel from being a full-time tarot reader for quite a few years now, and just having lots of experiences, I find that it naturally made me think a bit more deeply about what's actually going on here. And I think it ultimately, for me, this is going to sound really cheesy because it's one of those very kind of trite phrases you hear people use all the time, but I really do think it's because everything is connected. And because I feel everything in the universe is connected, I feel like everything, I think I would definitely be classed as an animist in many ways. I see everything as just alive and filled with spirit. And I would say that I like the idea that everything is constantly in communication all the time. There's like an ongoing conversation that's happening. And most of the time, when we're just going about our day-to-day lives, we're not tuned into it. But those of us who have a regular meditation practice, those of us who have a spiritual practice, that we, have especially if we are practicing in a disciplined way, we get more and more in touch with the flow or the conversation. These are like terms that I might use to describe it. And I find that divination can manifest in so many different ways, and you can practice divination. When I was thinking of how to describe this, this isn't a term I've used before, but I was thinking about it. I'd say you could maybe describe this as like a wilder or more spontaneous form of divination. But I have found in life that you can actually glean a reading, if you want to call it that, just from the world around you, if you're in the right headspace. So if you, for example, are wanting some guidance on something, you could set the intention that you want to, receive some guidance on a particular situation that you have in your life right now, and then go out for a walk and see what happens and see what you see. And I feel that it's like the universe can communicate back to you. And I know that there is a term that the Romans used to use, but I can't remember what the term is. There was a term that was used for when you walk past a group of strangers who are having a conversation and you happen to catch a few words, and those words are so pertinent to you and they have deep meaning for you. And it's all connected to that. And I feel like is connected to what the relationship between what's going on in our head and the world around us. And it's all connected to the fact that anyone that does a lot of spiritual practices will often find that they have an increase in synchronicities occurring, and that you notice more and more there seems to be that the world around you is mirroring back things that you've been thinking. You're thinking, what the hell's going on? And it's all just a constant reminder that we're all plugged in and we're all connected. And I think that we can go through life through long periods, actually, where we're just not very switched on, because we're just distracted all the time. But if we do, for example, practice a lot of meditation and spiritual practices, we get better at maintaining that connection. So I feel that all forms of divination are working because everything's connected. And then I think, I'm not going to say I'm definite, but I think I'm one of those people that doesn't really believe that anything is ever random. And, like there's this phrase that fortune tellers use, that the cards never lie. Whenever I do a reading, I always kind of affirm to myself that whatever cards come out are the cards that need to come out, even if you don't feel that you've shuffled properly or whatever. Whatever happens to fall out came out for a reason, and that if you take that mindset and you surrender to it, it can be very helpful. And then I think that when we work with an actual established system of divination, also, sorry, just to go back on what I was saying before about going for a walk and receiving signs that way. Somebody demonstrated this to me once years ago. Another one of my witchcraft teachers, an old high priest of mine, he actually gave me a reading once at the dinner table after we'd all had a meal. And he just very off the cuff gave me a reading based on what was left on the table. And he just started interpreting the positions of things and what they could mean, and it just made me realize that if you're in the right mindset, anything around you can be used as a divination tool. But yeah, when you work with an established system of divination like tarot cards, Lenormand cards, runes, the I Ching, the I Ching, whatever you're working with, I think it's a lot easier and a lot more straightforward most of the time, because you're working with a tool that has been finely tuned, and you're working with a set of symbols that have become its own egregore, and it's like a family of spirits. Some people talk about a deck of tarot cards as being like a family of spirits, and you learn from them. And also, if you use that tool for a long time, you build up your own personal relationship to those cards or spirits. So I feel that that's how it kind of works, really. And I think that because everything is connected and we can read with anything, it's actually perhaps easier than some people might think to create your own divination tool. Anyone can do it. I think if you just decide on a set of symbols you're going to work with and what they mean, and then you start working with that, it will start to work for you. That's what I've found anyway. So I hope that kind of gives some kind of, that's probably the best answer I can give.
No, it's really fascinating. And as you were talking, just so many points came up, and I'm just in complete agreement. And I mean, I'm not like a massive tarot reader, divination type person, but I've done a lot of it over the years, and it's never ceased to amaze me. I know exactly what you mean about snippets of conversations, sometimes, vehicle number plates. For me, I find there's just a strange shift in consciousness when it happens, almost like you're remembering a dream or so. It just subtly, do you know what I mean about that? Like you just feel it, like, oh, it's. And if you're attempting to put yourself in tune with everything, as above, so below, then it's easier for everything to to talk to you. One example that came to mind as you were talking, obviously dreams are a form of divination as well, and just one little flash of a memory came up, and that was a dream where I was sat between I'm trying to think of the name of this mythical griffin. That's it. I was sat between two griffins on a throne in this dream, and it was only when watching someone else's YouTube video who was very adept in terms of tarot and ancient Egypt. He started talking about these two griffins and showing, like, really, I think it was really old examples from, don't quote me on it, like Alexandria or something, like some weird coin or something. Oh God, I've seen this loads of times. It's like reality and the dream world, the collective unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, can talk to you in symbols that have been trodden and retrodden over so many years. Like just I mean, that's so weird to me, to think that there's an outside intelligence that can pick something from tarot or astrology or some tradition and then throw it at you, even if you're not fully you're fully versed in it. And you have to forgive me for rabbiting on. Where are we? Question 4. How are we doing? We've got about half an hour now. Do you think that a digital tarot program could work perhaps as a one card pool, in answer to a question? Because I'm guilty of this.
Do you mean like those like apps and websites where it shuffles the cards for you and then you stop it?
Yeah, and obviously I've thought to myself, maybe the phone's listening to you. So if you say something, and say you happen to mention, does does she still love me or something? It will throw the lover's card at you or something, because you never know with,
Mhm.
technology. But even so, even if it's doing that, like, do you think that, I mean, if everything is connected, do you think that, an app, a tarot app, even used sparingly, just a one card draw, do you think that could work?
I would say definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. I definitely think it could because I mean, I remember years ago using a website where you would just click a button and it would shuffle the cards for you, and then you would stop it when you wanted to, and it would pull out the cards. I think as long as your intention is clear of what your question is, and that you do that kind of surrendering to let it speak kind of
Mm.
thing, and you've got the set of symbols there and they are being picked at random, I think that absolutely it can work. And I have found when I've tried those apps that they've been spot on, so I would have to say it's no different to me than doing it, for real with your hands, or when you like pick up a book
Mm.
and practice bibliomancy, where you just open a page at random and see what it says. I think, yeah, I think it's just as valid actually. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason why it shouldn't work, and probably best just not to voice the question, just keep it inside when you press the button. You never know
Yeah.
with these crafty code writers. Right. Do you have any extraordinary tarot stories you could tell us, keeping anonymity where required?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you read tarot very regularly for people, like I have a lot of repeat customers, so I will have clients coming back to me who will often say, "Oh yeah, that what you said, that prediction that you made did come to pass." You get that a lot as a reader, and it's funny because all these years later, I still have moments where I doubt, where I have like some cynicism. Um, and no divination system is 100% correct all the time, but you will find consistently that you get good. A lot of readers find that consistently people come back to you and say, "Yep, that happened," or as you're reading for someone, they'll tell you, "Yes, that's what's going on." So you
Mm.
get lots of little confirmations like that. Um, One of the things that has been kind of really something that I've enjoyed actually since I went full time reading tarot a lot is seeing how literal the cards can be as well. Sometimes, like I drew the Tower for somebody who had, it was actually a reading I was doing for a woman about her husband, and I drew the Tower, and I gave her my impressions on what was going on, and she said, "Yeah, that's all true," but she said it's also what that card is also talking about is the fact that his shed, which was kind of like his man cave, where he hung out all the time,
Mm.
had actually caught on fire, and he'd had to escape out of the window. And in the a lot of traditional images for the Tower card, you have people jumping out the window. And another funny one, somebody that I know, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning this. I don't know him very well, but I remember him sharing this story. He was doing a thing where he was pulling a tarot card at the start of each day just to see what would happen. And one day he pulled the Ten of Swords, which, is, for those that don't know, it's one of the most dramatic images in the tarot, and it's a person face down with 10 swords in their back.
All right. Yeah.
So he picked the card and he thought, "Oh God, what kind of a day am I going to have today?" So he goes to work, and he worked in a school. And at the end of the day, he won a prize, and it was actually to have an acupuncture session. And so he actually was physically lying down with these, needles in his back. And that was when he remembered that he'd drawn the Ten of
All right.
Swords. So I find it funny how literal the cards can be. But for me, the most kind of an experience I had with tarot that really had an impact on me was when I had been reading professionally full time. I think at this point, maybe only a few months or maybe a year or two. I can't remember. It wasn't, I feel like it was at the earlier part of my journey of professional reading. And I was doing tarot. I would sometimes do tarot readings in this shop, like one day a week, because most of the work, all the work I do now is from home. But and this shop was actually part of it got involved in a Christmas market in Manchester in the town hall. And so I got to read in Manchester Town Hall a couple of days a week during the Christmas market season. And it was great to read in there because it's a great building. It's like a big Gothic building. And there was a young guy that came to me for, I think initially I gave a reading for his girlfriend, I think. He was probably only like 18 or something. And I just was giving quick readings, like 15-minute readings. And because I was kind of in the zone, a lot of the time I was barely looking up at the person I was reading for. I was just staring at the table. And I did this reading for this guy, and the general gist of the message, from what I can remember, was that he had been carrying some kind of guilt or shame around with him for a long time. And the cards were very insistent that he had no reason to be doing that. He had no reason to feel guilty. He hadn't done anything wrong, and that he needed to let go of it. And I just kind of trotted off this message. It was very quick. It didn't feel particularly like a big thing. And then when I looked up from the table, I remember feeling something energetically from him. I felt something quite strong, like a wave of something kind of coming towards me. And I said, "Is that okay?" And he said, "Yeah, that's fine." Like he looked like I had told him everything he needed to know. And he shook my hand and he said, "Thank you." And he wasn't expressing, he didn't have a very expressive face or anything. But as he shook my hand, completely out of the blue, I found myself thinking, "Oh my God, I'm literally about to drop to my knees and burst into tears and wail." And I actually thought, "Oh God, this is really embarrassing. Like what the fuck," basically. And I said, "Oh yeah, it's okay. I'm glad it helped." And he just walked off. And I remember I had to grip the table really hard and just take a really deep breath. And I said, "There's no way I am going to burst into tears for no reason in front of this, in this busy, crowded marketplace." So, I took a few deep breaths and I was really shaking. And then I calmed down after about 5 minutes. And it was the first time that I'd had such a strong and intense emotion run through me that I knew had nothing to do with me whatsoever. And so that was really powerful, even though I didn't have any visions, during the reading, and I didn't come out with loads of specific details. The impact of that I felt energetically and emotionally really stayed with me. And I think another reason why that reading was an important lesson for me was because that was one of the experiences that got me thinking deeper about divination. Because then I started finding myself thinking, I just happened to be here. Like something else was working through me, and that guy really needed to hear that. And isn't it wonderful that he happened to cross paths with me, and I could be the one, that the message came through me. And I started thinking things like, because he'd only just come into this place just kind of off the cuff, he just decided to wander into the market. If he hadn't have done that, how many more years would he have been carrying that guilt and shame on his back? And it just makes you feel like it's a reminder to you that you're a messenger, and there are times when you're being used by, another force or something for a message to come through that a person needs. And it really made me think as well about how, as a reader, we're in service to people as well. So it was a really quite profound experience, and that's one of the reasons it stayed with me. Yeah, that's my main story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the word divine providence came up as you were telling the last story. I think even the rogues among us, sometimes we are used to step in and help and change someone's life. And obviously you're a very intuitive person, I imagine, as you're artistic and everything. It's all rolled into one. I can imagine as you're reading the cards, you're getting a lot of feelings come up, and perhaps even images. I'm just taking a guess. Obviously if you're doing this professionally and you have very repeat custom and that kind of thing. And you never know when it's going to happen. Sometimes you just end up being that person, perhaps, who is perhaps as a stranger. Sometimes you're the only person that will deliver the truth, and obviously it works the other way around. It's definitely worked the other way around a few times over the years. Absolutely. Do you know the most striking tarot story I could tell was I was absolutely head over heels. Actually, I had you couldn't make it up, an Egyptian lady actually, and I was absolutely crazy about her. And as the relationship went on, lots of red flags kept coming up, and I was very suspicious that something was going on. And one evening around my place, I just had my major arcana, not this set, my self-made creations. And I sat in front of her and I said, you're keeping something from me. I'm going to shuffle. Can you imagine? I'm going to shuffle these cards and pick one, and that's what you're keeping secret. Yeah. So I shuffled the cards in front of her. Her face was like this, and I pulled out the Emperor. I was like, a rich man. There's someone who you view as capable and powerful that maybe you've got a little bit of an eye for in the background when I'm not around. She goes to me, that's bullshit. Do it again. Okay, then. I swear, I'm not telling a lie. I shuffled them all again, and she's looking at me like this. I'm looking at her. A minute goes by. The tension, the air is filled with that consciousness changing tension. I swear to God, I pulled out another card. It was the same card again. It's like, busted. Okay, I think that's a good place. We'll take a little break here. I'll turn the recording off, and we'll hopefully, if this is actually working, we'll have a wonderful podcast in motion. Okay. And we are back. Moving on to question 6. And moving into your own creation, what is an oracle deck, and what have you created in terms of its use? Maybe talk about the very large accompanying book too.
Okay, so I'll just show the decks first. So I have the larger cards and the more kind of these ones are more like the size of your average tarot deck, and these are more the size of the average oracle deck. And then I have the paperback book and the hardback book, and they're both the same. They just they both have full color reproductions of all the paintings. The only difference is literally that one is paperback and the other is hardback. So oracle decks, I think I've noticed that some people have slightly different ideas about what oracle decks actually are. I always understood, just in my experience from going to occult shops, growing up, well in the 90s. And also working, I actually worked in Manchester. Used to have this really cool occult shop called New Aeon Books, and it went for about 20. I think it was 22 years, and I worked there like on a Saturdays in the last the last year or two of its life.
Mm.
And they always used to have a good selection of tarot decks, and I probably encountered my first oracle cards there as well. But I remember before I think we really used that term oracle decks. Do you remember in the late 90s and early 2000s you'd see angel cards?
Yep.
I feel like that was my first experience of, or the first time I saw decks of cards that weren't tarot. And there were like a few other exceptions. Like I remember there was somebody did the runes as a deck of cards. I actually have that deck. It's probably quite rare these days. And you would sometimes see people creating decks of cards that, followed their own system, and it wasn't tarot. But in general, all I knew about really back then was tarot cards and angel cards. And then from the angel card phenomenon, I noticed more and more decks started to come out, like unicorn decks and fairy decks. And for a long time, oracle decks had this reputation, which for a lot of people they still do have. They had this reputation of being, fluffy and lighter, that the messages weren't that deep, and it was almost more just kind of positive, feel good. And it was usually images of, flowers and angels and fairies and unicorns. But I feel like the concept of the oracle deck has really developed over the years.
Mm.
And now oracle decks can be incredibly deep, and there are oracle decks that have very dark themes as well. There's serial killer oracle decks now.
Jesus.
Yeah, like literally pull a card and pick
Yeah.
who your serial killer of the day is.
God.
It's really, really evolved a lot. So oracle decks really are very broad. It's literally a deck of cards. It can be as many cards as you like. They're usually somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 odd cards usually. Mine's a bit more. Mine's 68 cards. And it really depends on the creator and how deep they want to take it. If they want to create a deck that has really heavy meanings in it, that with lots of room to ruminate and ponder, or they want an oracle deck that's really low on text and is more just about artwork and your intuition. So that they really can be taken in lots of different places. And nowadays there's a lot of oracle decks that have quite very substantial guidebooks with them, and they might provide spiritual exercises to do for each card that you get, and all kinds of information in there. So my oracle deck is more kind of in that kind of arena. I would also just say that I've heard some people using the term oracle deck for old decks of cards that I would call more fortune-telling decks, like the Lenormand cards and the Sigourney cards, I think they're called. Yeah, that's a whole other thing as well. But the Oracle deck I created was more I suppose, in the spirit of some of the more substantial decks that you get being called Oracle decks now. So as I said, it was 68 cards. And for me, I designed this deck to be used in multiple ways, which again is quite typical nowadays with a lot of Oracle decks. So it can absolutely be used for divination, but it can also be used as a meditation tool, as an inspiration tool. It can also be used to plan workings that you're doing, so because it's witchcraft themed, it can be used to plan rituals. It can be used to inspire discussion. The cards can also be used as like talismans in and of themselves, or like art pieces to have on altars or shrines. And they can be used to inspire any writing you're doing, all kinds of things really. Trying to think if I've listed them all, if I've listed it all there correctly. They can be used to help. I designed them to see if they could be used to help magically diagnose a situation as well, which I kind of touched on when I talked about ritual planning. But if you want to kind of figure out what the best course of action is magically or spiritually with something, the cards might be able to help inspire that as well. So I've created them with a lot of purposes in mind, basically.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
suppose if the universe is having a conversation with itself at various levels of intensity at certain times with certain people, depending on how tuned in that they are, and we did already talk about you can perhaps use anything for divination. What struck me there was if you pick a subject, I suppose you could make your own like you have, but if you picked a subject that contains every archetype, and for that reason that it's bloody popular anyway, so just take the Lord of the Rings. We know
Hmm.
we can find anything from love to the, the small heroic character who shouldn't be a warrior who is, and treachery and honor, and all the characters in that book. If you just I suppose you'd have to systematize it, but I suppose there's nothing. And come to mind as well, just that we talked about the sort of derogatory sort of view on angel cards, and I think Doreen Virtue comes to mind as lumped in with
Yeah.
that, which is obviously a play on Dion Fortune, which I always found was very odd. It'd be like calling yourself like Alan Cowley or something. It's a bit weird. But she's a Christian now, isn't she? She like renounced everything and became a born again Christian. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it just goes to show, there's all kinds of trips going on out there. Your art, actually, the reason why I wanted to talk to you, because obviously I've said before, I only talk to people that I want to talk to, because there's no point in just trying to interview everyone and send loads of messages and just, so tell me about yourself, tell me about the book, and sort of just sit there, and it's that's a waste of time for me. So there's always a point of interest for me. And my point of interest, and this is going to relate to the next question that we'll get onto in just a second, is your art is like the opposite of mine. Do you know what I mean by that?
Hmm.
Mine's all black and white, and it's kind of
Hmm.
it's a bit dark, it's a bit gruesome, and yours is very colorful and very, very beautiful, I think. So it's, for me,
Thank you.
it's like looking in a kind of opposite mirror, and like, look at this whole
Hmm.
world going on in this guy's head. Like, because I don't understand it, I couldn't make the art that you make. That makes it interesting for me. So yeah, we'll get on to the next question then. So number 7, we are on 7. Let me just have a check. Yeah, we are on 7. Lucky sevens. Quoted from your website, I spent 5 years working on the Oracle of the Witch Current during a fairly low point in my life that saw me mostly housebound for 3 of those years due to health issues. This difficult yet creative period, do you look back and see the hand of fate, perhaps a kind of dark man initiation, not unlike the Setian vibe, that wanted to birth something new into the world?
Yeah, I do. I do feel like the whole process is like an initiation. And to be honest, I feel like I'm still in it. I know that a lot of people have been feeling things have just been off for a long time now. And it's the same for me. It was kind of like, just as everything was going crazy in the world, things were feeling very crazy for me as well in my personal life. Um, so for me, I would say things in my life generally, and I'm not going to go into too much about my personal life here, but
Of course.
things in my personal life have been off now since about 2019. The whole of the 20s so far has mostly sucked for me. And I've just felt like a shadow of my former self. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Sorry, carry on. I just couldn't help but like give you a kind of
that's good.
amen in a kind of
Yeah.
sort of weary way there. So yeah,
It's nice to know that I'm not alone. And I know I'm not
Jesus.
alone. I know that a lot of people feel this way, but yeah, I've actually been, again, without going into too much detail, I have been mostly housebound and mostly not really having any kind of a social life now since about 2020. And I used to be someone that was going to nightclubs every week for about 15 years. Like I was very into the nightlife. And I've gone from that and always kind of being able to put myself in spaces where there's people around me and everything. I've gone from that to being really, really hermit like. And it's other than like a very, very close couple of friends of mine, I just don't really see anyone. And because of certain health issues that I've had, that have made it harder for me to get out. So I was kind of living a lockdown type of lifestyle before about a year before the lockdowns happened. And so when the lockdowns happened and lots of people were like, understandably very infuriated by it, I was kind of unfazed because I was already in this cocoon already. And I just remained in it. And I said, I thought, well, I was working on the deck every single day. So I thought, well, I've got my work cut out. So I'm just going to keep my head down and keep painting, keep writing. And yeah, I definitely feel better. And there have been improvements for me. But I'm waiting to get properly to the light at the end of the tunnel. So I feel like I'm still in the thick of it, really, and I don't fully know what's going on or where this is going. So yeah, I do feel that it has felt very initiatory, and it felt like I had to make the deck, even though I still even now, because I published this deck about 2 years ago, and I still don't really feel that anything has happen because I was making this deck like kind of following my intuition. I felt that I had to do it. I felt that I didn't really have a choice. I felt that it had to be done, and I'm still trying to figure out why was that the case, because not really very much has changed since I released it. But yeah, I think it's part of something bigger, and I think a lot of us feel it. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I've heard different theories, and
I can relate to that so much. I'm just sort of swamped with possible avenues we could go into there. I mean, the world went crazy, didn't it? I mean, I remember a night when the lockdown began. I remember just building a fire in a field, and obviously my van is just parked on the hill next to me, which is at that time my new home, and still is 4.5 years later. And everywhere was silent because there was obviously no traffic, you know. And I remember just sitting there like, what happened to the world?
What happened to the world?
And obviously we've talked a lot about synchronicity. That's kind of it's obviously all going on, but there is a point of contention with me towards some of my really really good associates actually. They have a very positive view on magic and initiation and all that kind of thing. But I can't shake it that it's supposed to be grueling in some way. You might say that I'm kind of making sense of things in reverse. We try to explain our misfortunes. Like if I hadn't have gone through that, I wouldn't have met that person. I wouldn't know this. And there is a view that it can be an harmonious process. And I think if you believe that, you're one of the lucky ones, because for most of us, it kind of isn't. And I know all the best songs I've written, all the best art I've made, all the best insights, the hardest lessons. It's all most of it has come through pain. And sometimes you're asking yourself, like, Jesus, can we just, when does the happiness drop? And there are moments of that, of course, and what a grand adventure we're on. I'm sort of speaking for you here a little bit as well, as I'm waffling on. But that sense of the grand adventure, there's definitely a trade-off with the with the darkness. I mean, you can see this. You can see this expressed in all kinds of traditions. I mean, we were talking about Christianity just then. I mean, carrying the cross and um, a lot of these dreams and visions and a lot of these archetypal processes, they do involve that stage. And I guess the hope comes that it's always leading somewhere, so that kind of gives us faith, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. You know what? I mean, just like you, I wouldn't want to say too much on camera or whatever, but fucking hell, like, the price of wisdom. The thing is, you're always learning. It doesn't matter where you think you're at. Every now and then, someone else embodies that divine providence that you know attempts to correct you, and you have to suck it up. I've found anyway, in my experience.
Hmm.
I tell you what, I'd foolishly knocked one of my torches on the floor, and the batteries have they're all over the floor. So I'm gonna turn the camera off just for a moment while I fetch some
Okay.
fresh batteries and hopefully bring some light. With light sources here, and I think we're ready for the next question.
Hmm.
Right, number 8. How have you structured your 68 card deck? What are the categories?
Okay, so that's what I can refer to the book now. So the cards are divided into, first of all, I have the 5 elements. So I have the elements, and then I have the 7 classical planets. Then the next category is deities and spirits. So deities and spirits that are connected to witchcraft. Then I have the next category is mysteries and concepts. Then I have tools. And then I have magical techniques and topics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is it 7? I always forget how many categories it is. I think it's 7.
So you've
No,
kind of
6,
just
sorry.
so you've
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
6.
taken witchcraft as obviously the main subject and sort of divided that up into sort of manageable archetypes and where you can find any quality
Yeah.
or
So I cover things like different concepts that you find within modern witchcraft as a whole, different deities, spirits, practices, ideas, techniques, bits of history and mythology, all that are relevant in some way, shape, or form to what we call witchcraft. And it draws a lot. People within the occult, I'm very aware that there's a lot of people that don't like to use the word witchcraft. They feel it's become too vague and means too many things, which I totally get. I also totally understand people who feel that the word witch is inappropriate, and I get that as well. But I think if you are an occultist that's drawn to the particular traditions and practices that are referred to as witchcraft, a lot of the time it can make sense to say, yeah, call me a witch if you want, because it kind of ties in with all of that stuff. But yeah, because witchcraft is so broad, that's probably why the deck is so big and goes off, onto so many different journeys, because it really does cover a lot of different elements.
absolutely. And respect to you for starting and finishing a massive project. There's a bit of a sort of a cliche between me and some of my associates. We use this IAO thing, Isis, Apophis, Osiris, When you
Mm.
start a project, it's ISIS. It's like, this is amazing. It's all you can think about and you want to talk about it. And then you have to pass through the apophis stage, which is like, this is actually hard work. And this can apply to any endeavor in life. But if you just hold in there, you eventually emerge at the Osiris phase. You know, every song you write, every picture. I mean, I know this. Every time I draw a picture, start off really enthusiastically, and then somewhere near the end, it's like now I have to color in the sky behind every individual star and cloud, and make it layer it so it looks like a sunset or whatever. And like, it's going to take an hour or three, you know. So
Mhm.
yeah, respect to you for, you know, breaking the apophis stage and emerging as Osiris there. So right, next question.
Mhm.
Let us do a deep dive into your beautiful art. Sorry for the length of my questions, but when I write them, it just I
Okay.
only realize later how long, how long they're. So deep breath for the deep dive into your beautiful art, and it is beautiful. I see the influence of you being a makeup artist, the obvious spiritual content, and a smattering of astral, gay bar, glitz. And I want to say I don't know anything about those kind of places. I only know what Lucius Movena told me. Astral, gay bar, glitz invaded by athletic bald women. Is that fair? Can you take us through the creative process and materials used?
Well, yeah, I think I love that description. I think that that's very fair. um, yeah, yeah. My previous career, I mean, it kind of never. I did. I will be respectful to myself and say, yeah, I was a makeup artist. It didn't. The career didn't last as long as I wanted it to. Various things happened that kind of got in the way. But yeah, I have a big, or I did have a big passion for makeup, and that kind of came out of my love of makeup. Kind of started with way back very soon, not long after actually getting involved in witchcraft. I was around that age, you know, I was a teenager and I was starting to express myself through clothing and in, you know, dressing up and everything, um, and then all the nightlife as well. So my inspirations definitely do come from my work my previous career as a makeup artist, and then also all of the years spent in nightclubs, all of the club kids and drag queens and everything that I was surrounded by for years. All of that has fed into, you know, fed into all of this. But in terms of my creative process, I would say, so when I got into painting in a big way, it was it was when I remember when I started painting with acrylics. I kind of swore an oath to myself, not formally, but I remember that I kind of made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to go to any classes. I wasn't going to watch any videos on how to paint. I wasn't going to learn from another person, and I wasn't going to take any courses because I've taken various courses in my life to get different qualifications, and in some cases I got quite bitter about it because I thought that was a waste of time. Why did I do that? So I didn't want to stress myself out and put myself through any courses. And I've known people who've studied art at university, and the way that it's taught made them fall out of love with the whole thing. And for me, I wanted my art to be a total safe haven. I wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to be a refuge for myself, and not to give a fuck what anyone thought about whether they liked it or not. I just wanted to do what made me happy. So I just started painting from a sense of I'm not very confident with lots of things in life, but for some reason I'm confident about creating art and not really caring if I don't love how it looks totally, or if it's criticized. I'm not really bothered
Yes.
about that.
Yeah.
So once I got to a point where with my painting where I felt happy with how my paintings looked, I thought, yeah, I could, you know, make an oracle deck. And there's not a lot that I can really say about my creative process, unfortunately. I feel like I disappoint people when I kind of, because I've been asked this question a couple of times, especially if it's like magical practitioners asking me, knowing me as an occultist, they think, oh, what do you do? And it's not that I do any complex rituals or anything really beforehand. When I was creating this deck, I started out by writing. I'm definitely a list writer, so I just started writing lists of what cards I wanted to have in the deck. And as I started painting and creating, I kept noticing that I would write more lists. I kept getting more and more ideas coming to me, and there was a real sense of urgency, like that needs to be in the deck as well. I need to have a card for this and a card for that. And the way that my creative process, and this isn't just for my Oracle decks, but all of my paintings, I basically just get ideas that come to me. A lot of the time, they come to me fully formed. I have a very strong kind of interior landscape, and what would happen sometimes with some of the cards I didn't know. Sometimes I would just get the concept that needed to be expressed. All I would do is literally sit down in front of the canvas and just close my eyes and say, okay, how does this look? Show me how it, almost like I was asking someone, which might sound a bit sinister, like am I communicating with a demon or something? But I would
Nice.
just ask.
Yeah, valid. Totally
I
valid. You're
would
talking to
basically,
your unconscious, like, show me,
yeah, yeah,
lead me.
basically talking to
Yeah.
my unconscious, yeah. And I would just say, okay, what does it look like? And usually, 9 times out of 10, I get the full image that is just shown to me. And I know that, most of the time, once the painting is done, it is going to look different to the image that I was shown in my head. Sometimes it's very close, though, and that can be quite satisfying. But it's also satisfying and interesting to see how it evolves as I'm painting it, and how I might be halfway through painting and decide that I'm actually going to use completely different color scheme, or I'm going to not have this part of the painting in it at all. I'm just going to focus on this. So it usually ends up looking a bit different to the original image that I get in my head. But yeah, I remember speaking once to an artist who she said to me she had paintings that queue up in her head, and I thought, oh my god, that's exactly what it feels like for me. As soon as I started painting, I would get these
Yeah,
ideas. Oh, I
yeah,
want to do a painting of this, and I want to do this, and I
yeah.
just let them queue up. There's still paintings in this queue in my head that have been there maybe for about 6 years now that I still haven't gotten round to doing. But other ones drop off, and I don't, I kind of lose interest in those. But I always have like a bank of images just in my head that wants to be
Mm.
expressed. So, and a lot of the paintings, the only other thing I would say about my creative process is quite a lot of the paintings I would do in one sitting. So quite a lot of the paintings would take about maybe 12 hours or something. And I would paint sitting cross-legged on the floor, and I would just paint throughout the night. Now, I have redone quite a few of the paintings as well, but even when I would redo them, I would still do that painting usually in one sitting, sometimes two sittings. But yeah, that's my creative process, really. It's quite full on, really, but just very direct.
Absolutely relate to that. And it's like you're hitting the sweet spot there, because if you spent longer than 12 hours, it could go on too long. If you're doing lots of art, if you just have this one masterpiece, you could, spend a long time. Yeah, I completely relate to these points. And those it's interesting that you have those eyes behind you, because to me, the two most, if I say this, I'll probably think of something else later, but right now here it strikes me that the symbols of the eyes and the symbol of the bird, these are really prominent for me, because vision, it tends to just land in your head, like a bird almost. It brings to mind those sort of apkallu, I think it is the word, those Sumerian sort of, bird, with the wings and the beak and the bird feet, and I think there's something in that, and my the work of art I'm most proud of actually does feature a bird and vision, and it's always stuck with me actually. But right, let's check where we are. We're about to move on to looking at some cards in detail, and obviously in the editing I will include a picture of the card on the screen, so I will let you control how quickly we move through those. I think we got about sort of 15 or so cards to cover, and
Okay.
then we end on to, and then we've got 4 questions after, so I'll let you you know, control the speed as much as possible.
Would you
And
still like me to hold up the cards?
please do, yeah, because I've sat and meditated upon these cards for a little while, each in turn. But there are a lot of them. So if you hold up the card, I've also made a little note on some of them as well that I have here. So I'll turn the camera off just for a quick moment, and then we'll come back and we shall let the viewer see some of this lovely art. So Seth, please take us through the chosen images from the deck.
Okay, so this first card is Coven.
Okay.
And I hope you can see that okay.
Absolutely.
So for the imagery here, I took some inspiration, I think, from, well, I know I took some inspiration from all of the photographs I've seen of different covens over the years, especially I think the first photographs I ever saw of modern day witches in covens would have been the Janet and Stuart Farrar books. Those books, were some of my favourites of the books that I read at the beginning of my journey, and were the reason ultimately that I wanted to pursue the Alexandrian tradition as well. At one point, I was involved with that. But the Coven card is basically about the concept of the Coven. I give a bit of history in the book about where the concept comes from. Some people argue that it has its origins actually in Scottish law, the concept, and the meaning of the card is about working with other people, even if it's not formally with a coven. It's an encouragement to bond and connect with like-minded souls, basically, and to work with to get inspiration and support from others. Even if you can't meet up physically, there's an encouragement to try maybe connecting with other people online. And I think that it's really important for anyone on a magical path to have associates and friends and acquaintances, to have other people. Even if you are a solitary practitioner, it's so important, I think, to make some connections. I think you'd go crazy if you didn't have other people you
Yeah.
could share things with.
I think I think there's a high chance that you probably would go a little bit mad without some checks and balances. And
Yeah,
I mean, is obviously sometimes with energies and influences floating around, it can lead to some quite amazing experiences and bonding experiences as well. I've definitely found that.
yeah.
So we'll move on to the next card.
So the next one is Sea Priestess. So the inspiration for this image, I'm drawing from 2 sources. So the most immediately apparent to people who know about her is that this is based on a famous painting that is used in African diasporic traditions. It's used most commonly for Iemanjá or Yamaya, the Brazilian Orisha that's connected to the ocean. So the Orisha that's connected to the oceans, because she's very big in Brazil in some of the Afro diaspora, in some of the Afro-Brazilian traditions. There's a big festival that they have for her on the beach. But the image is also used in I also know that I also know that it's used by some people in Haiti for a different spirit, because in the early 2000s, I was involved in a Haitian voodoo group for a year, and I had some really interesting experiences with that. And not only that, but ever since then in my life, people quite close to me are very involved in some of the Afro diasporic traditions. So there's been a bit of an influence there, but I don't actively practice those traditions myself. And it's also inspired by the final scene of Lucius Apuleius's book, The Golden Ass, where the goddess Isis arises from the ocean. So there's a combination of like Isis, who's a very important goddess for me, but also for Western magical traditions and witchcraft. So there's a fusion of like Yemaya, Isis, the idea of oceanic mother goddesses, and then obviously the title of the card calls to mind the famous novel by Dion Fortune. And in the entry for this card, I go in and talk about Dion Fortune's life and how her work has influenced modern witchcraft, even though she passed away before Wicca really took off. She definitely made a big impact on modern witches. The
Absolutely.
next,
And
Mhm.
sorry, carry on. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just like charging ahead there.
Yeah,
Would you?
no, that's okay. I was just going to say that I did notice the half moon reflections in her eyes, which was a nice touch,
Oh
and
yes,
the
yeah,
and the brilliance of the shine in the crown. I sort of obviously saw Isis and a bit of Hathor there, and
yeah.
the shine of the moon is exactly the way that it looks in reality. So yeah, really beautiful. So talking of eyes again, we'll move to the man with the black hollow eyes next.
So we have Saturn. So this card obviously is from the grouping of cards that are all just dedicated to the 7 classical planets. And all of
Okay.
the cards for the 7 classical planets, I have an image of the Greco-Roman deity of the same name, and then I have the glyph of the planet. I have the Kamiya, the magic number square. I have the glyphs for the zodiac signs, and then I have the symbol of the Olympic spirit of the planet, and then the planetary intelligences. And each of these cards is basically, all the correspondences for that planet and how they, how they come to bear in a reading.
Absolutely.
The next card I have is Wealth Magic.
Okay.
So this is,
Lovely, vibrant yellow there.
yeah. This card, all the colours on here relate to wealth in some way. So you've got the yellow/gold background that relates to the sun, which is good for wealth magic. The green of her top relates to Venus and the Earth, which are very bountiful and abundant, which we connect with money. Then we have a Jupiter candle here with, the royal blue, and it's marked with a glyph of Jupiter, because Jupiter's great for expansion and entrepreneurial pursuits. And the big talisman in the center is the, I think it's the 4th Solomonic pentacle of Jupiter, which is for
Oh, I
wealth
see.
drawing. So yeah, all the symbolism in there is very clear. Again, this is talking about wealth magic. I talk about from specific things that people might do magically to attract wealth, or what kind of correspondences they might work with magically. But I also talk a bit about how to approach the whole concept of abundance and prosperity and everything magically, and what kind of forces are associated with it, which I mentioned before. The Sun, the Earth, Venus, and Jupiter. I see them as I see them as being good pools of inspiration to draw from if you're attempting to do some money-based magic. Next, I have Road Opener. I'm a big fan of road opener workings. This is something that you find the term road opener in hoodoo and Latin American folk magics. And it's all about magic to open your roads whenever you feel stuck in life. You know, some people use road openings for a specific area of their life. Other people will do a road opener to just open up everything if they just want a change in life or they feel that they're stuck with something. So
And yeah,
the symbolism is very clear. It's just a clear road, fresh
it is
beginnings.
very, very direct. When I first looked at that card, I just thought that's exactly how I want to feel. Like
Yeah,
there's something lovely on the horizon, and I'm just peacefully walking forward towards it with my arms open in complete faith. Yeah, it's really nice.
yeah.
So we'll move to Know Thyself next, which has a, to me, that's a kind of false door type of image there, the gateway.
Yeah, so this, I just wanted a card that related to the mystery religions of the ancient world, you know, like the rites of Eleusis, the mystery cult of Isis, and Dionysus, because the idea of witchcraft as a mystery cult or as a mystery priesthood or mystery religion, that is something that was big for, is big for some forms of witchcraft. So obviously traditional Wicca that in many ways kicked off the whole modern witchcraft movement. Wicca sees itself very much as a mystery tradition, and it does take inspiration from the old mystery cults, to the point where some of us might even say we could consider those kinds of traditions our spiritual ancestors in some way. But it's also not just Wicca that sees itself as taking inspiration from mystery cults, because other forms of modern witchcraft, like Robert Cochrane, he had quite a mystical approach to his craft as well. That I actually make a point in the guidebook. I talk a little bit about what a mystery cult is, and the impact they had on modern witchcraft. But I also talk about the fact that both Robert Cochrane, who hated Gerald Gardner, but Robert Cochrane and Gerald Gardner, even though they kind of those two men represent two different streams of modern witchcraft, they both still saw witchcraft as being about a pursuit, a path to Godhead, and a mystical path. They both saw it that way. Neither of them saw witchcraft as just casting a few spells and, you know, celebrating some seasonal festivals. It was much deeper. So I wanted to,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
I wanted to acknowledge that. Next card I have is Healing Magic, and I've got the Rod of Asclepius, the healing god up here, and then I've got the Abracadabra triangle pointing down. So I talk about the history of the use of Abracadabra triangles, and you know you get the ones that point down and the ones that point up. And I talk about a little bit about Asclepius, the god of healing. I also talk about different methods different methods of healing magic that witches will use, different approaches that people might take. So, for example, I personally am not a fan of doing magical workings where you specifically visualize yourself sending healing energy to particular organs and things like that. I know that that's how a lot of people work, but I prefer to take a different approach where I just send the intention for them to be well and leave the how up to the surgeons and the if there's any surgery involved and the deities. Basically, I leave it up to the divine, because I feel a bit nervous about that when I see people sending energy to a particular part of the body. It's like, how much do you know is actually going on with this
Yeah. Good
patient
point.
that you're no, the only kind of scenario that I mention I would be okay would be if the magic was being done by a witch who was also the patient's doctor or their surgeon. You
Yeah.
know, if you absolutely know what you're talking about. But if you don't know what you're talking about, I would just send the magic, direct the magic for complete healing, and leave it into the lap of the divine as to how it manifests. I'm
Absolutely.
trying to think what else I was going to say about this card. Yeah, because I also talk about how when we think of healing magic, a lot of people think in terms of healing a disease or something, but it can be so much more than that, and how, you know, magic itself can be healing in many, many ways, basically. The next card I have is Glamour
Absolutely.
Magic.
And I want to say here,
Mm-hmm.
only you could come up with this next card.
All right. Glamour Magic. Yeah, this talks about the magic of glamour, and glamour as the concept that we have in society today. It has very, very magical roots. You know, glamour is the word glamour is a Scottish word, I believe, that's related to the word grimoire. You know, and
Really?
glamoury originally in Scotland was considered a form of witchcraft, and yeah, just, you know, the whole magical history of makeup and people's, not just makeup, but our appearance and how we present ourselves, shape shifting, all of that. I go in, you know, in the book, I talk about the magic of glamour. I talk about even how like religion uses it, and theatrics. I talk about how a person might work a glamoury on themselves, how they may enchant a particular piece of clothing or jewelry, and kind of like program an intention that they have of how they want to be perceived, you know, before they go out. So I talk about different aspects of glamour work, and kind of a deeper way of looking at glamour magic that I appreciate, and it comes from, I first encountered this idea from a modern witch called Jawon Ku, who used to have a YouTube channel called Witches and Wine, and she would talk about how glamour really is we think, a lot of people think of glamour as fake and it hiding something, but a lot of the time a person's glamour can actually be them expressing themselves, and the glamour is actually a way of enabling them to come out of their shell, and it's an extension of who they are, rather than it being fake or a trick or a lie or deceitful. You know, it can actually be something very genuine and authentic.
I totally
Uh,
agree. Who doesn't want to be in the company of a glamorous person? It's always lovely.
yeah. Then I have Aradia or Aradia.
Yep.
So I talk about the influence of Charles Godfrey Leland's book, The Aradia or Gospel of the Witches. Aradia, the story of Aradia was very inspiring to Gerald Gardner. Most people think that it's largely fictional, but there's different theories about how much of it is rooted in a genuine Italian tradition. And because of the popularity of Aradia, the name Aradia was like a publicly used name for the goddess of Wicca at one time. Yeah, so I felt that she was very important. And when I painted this, as soon as I painted it, I realized that I wanted her to be on the front cover of the book and the packaging.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it just struck me in the moment, because even though I still had a ton more paintings to do, when I did this one, I knew that I wanted this one on the front cover. The next card I have is Astral Temple. So I talk about the use of astral temples. You know, a lot of these cards really, it kind of says what it does on the tin, you know. So for the entry for this card, I talk about how magical temples are used on the astral. I talk about that technique that some magicians use, where they actually kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They kind of overlay their astral temple over the physical space that they're working in. So it's important in ritual, at certain points in a ritual, they're doing something physical in the physical room that they work in, but at certain points in the ritual, they will close their eyes and they will see themselves doing the same work in the astral version of the temple. And in terms of like divinatory meaning, I think for this card, some of the meanings are like an encouragement to use your imagination more. and to go back to the drawing board and really plan things. Because I associate astral temple work a lot with planning. I feel that a lot of people use astral temples as a place to go to retreat for ideas and inspiration. The next card I have is Candle.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And that's okay. I just wanted to say on the astral temple there.
Yeah.
To anyone who hasn't experimented with this kind of thing, do not underestimate the absolute joy that you will come back with if you spend that much time in your imagination. I was just the last book I read, actually, the author was talking about the practicalities of copying an actual ancient Egyptian temple in your mind, and obviously you just keep the more you go back there, obviously the more real it becomes, the more that you can hone in on the details, and just you can't. I'm just saying, personally speaking, you can't underestimate the sense of healing and joy that comes from that. So sorry, carry on to. I've got something to say about the next one as well, obviously on the Egyptian theme, which is Candle.
Yeah, sure. So Candle is the next one, and I wanted to include the Cobra candlestick because that was so indicative of. I think it's so emblematic of occultists in the 60s and 70s. You know, I mentioned before how I got a lot of inspiration. You know, right from when I was a teenager, I was very inspired by the black and white photographs of, you know, Alex and Maxine Sanders and their covens, and they always had these Cobra candlesticks. And I know lots of witches who made sure they got some because they're very easy to come by. I think they were like mass produced in India, maybe still are. But yeah, it's very kind of iconic symbol for me seeing, you know, a candle in the Cobra candle holder. But I talk about in this deck, I actually go into the history of the roots of modern candle magic and how a lot of it comes out of hoodoo, and particularly there are theories which I think probably hold a lot of weight that a lot of the modern ideas you find around candle magic come from what we might now call hoodoo candle magic, or the setting of lights, that, you know, hoodoo practitioners might refer to it as that. But a lot of those ideas come from New Orleans, and it was a combination of hoodoo beliefs mixed in and inspired by a lot of Catholic practices with candles, like praying novenas. And I make a point in the book of saying how I feel that not enough people give credit to how much inspiration is taken from hoodoo in modern witchcraft. You know, there's a lot of spell books over the years that have been published, and that is straight up hoodoo with a few things taken out, perhaps, but they don't give credit to it being, you know, where it comes from. And I'm like a lot of practitioners. Excuse me. Like a lot of practitioners, I'm actually a big fan of candle work. It's one of the most used techniques. I never get bored of it. So the candle section is one of the larger sections because I'm such an obsessive about this. I even geek out about where I think early Wiccans in the UK got some of their inspiration for candle workings from. So I talk about the history there. Then we have cleansing.
Oh, before we move on to cleansing, you might want to look up. I've only just read about it myself, so it's very likely Greco-Egyptian, probably in the PGM, but who knows? It might have been on there might be something in hieroglyphs or whatever. But I do know that there is reference to fashioning 4 images of the Egyptian snake goddess Renenetet, and that would look exactly like that image you made. So usually in magic we have this kind of obviously the 4 directions, and in the Egyptian sources you're encouraged to have a below, above, and a center as well, which makes 7. And there is this talk in certain passages of these 4 Renenetets to be placed in each corner. So it might be something worth looking into.
Oh, that
Please
sounds
carry on.
really cool. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds really cool. The next card I have is cleansing. So I talk about this is an image of somebody looks like he's in the Himalayas, having a nice cleansing bath there. I go into detail talking about the concept of spiritual cleansings, ritual purification, cleansing yourself of spirit attachments. I talk about a little bit about all of those things in this card.
And
Next,
there's a
I have
lotus as well floating, which
yeah,
obviously
I
is a symbol of cleansing, and
have
obviously the lotus is a self-cleaning flower. So I noticed that little reference there. Sorry, carry on, my friend.
yeah, and actually the main reason I didn't even think about the lotus thing that much, but the main reason that I have these white flower petals in here is because some of my friends are very big on spiritual baths that are made like according to like hoodoo and also some Afro-diasporic recipes. Like I have a friend who's very, very big on spiritual baths. He does them very regularly. And a lot of the cleansing baths that he has, he always uses white flower petals. So that's something that I always think of when I think of cleansing baths. The next card is tree. And I talk about the influence of Hermetic Kabbalah in modern witchcraft, and also all of the mythologies that you find around the world tree, the Axis Mundi, Yggdrasil, all of that stuff, and how the image of the tree is used in a lot of visualizations that witches use for like journeying, upper world, middle
Absolutely.
world, and also grounding as well. And the middle pillar, I talk about how the Golden Dawn technique of the middle pillar is used. Can be used in a lot of different ways. I talk about that.
Definitely a massive
Um,
subject. And I was wondering when I looked at that image, I was wondering that the opening in the bottom of the tree, is that supposed to symbolize a sort of way to the cliffothic realms or anything, or is that just accidental?
it could do. It wasn't intentionally.
Yeah.
I like. I think ever since I was a kid, I've always liked to see the image of a tree that has like this opening, because it makes me think
Mm.
of is ever since I was probably from a lot of us, it's probably the first time we see an image like that is from Alice in Wonderland. So we do have this idea of it being a portal, to another
Yeah.
realm.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it felt natural for me to include that there. But yeah, it's totally like a nod to the underworld,
Mm.
and then the middle world and the upper world. The next card I have is trance. This card, the artwork on this one is there's one other card that I did in this kind of style. It wasn't planned. It just how it kind of came out. There's a card that I have called Hex, which is I did in this slightly rougher kind of style. But yeah, this is all about trance work and I talk about altered states of consciousness. I talk about transpossession. I talk about how some channeling and what kind of form it takes in witchcraft, with like drawing down the moon, and I talk a little bit about how Janet Farrar, in more recent years, although it's quite a long time ago now, Janet Farrar and Gavin Bone, they kind of almost, I don't think they would call it another tradition, but they developed a particular style of witchcraft that's very much geared on trans prophecy, and for people who are interested in that kind of work, it's very exciting because it's all about drawing down the gods and actually having the gods speak through people in the same way that happens in African diasporic traditions and African traditions. But a lot of people haven't seen that kind of work as much with European deities, and they've had some very interesting experiences that they've written about, of channeling
Mm.
various Greek, Roman, Norse, and Celtic deities. So I talk a bit about that. Next, I have meditation. Talk about how important meditation is.
That
This one,
card is that's outstanding. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. I'm being honest with you, mate. That card is outstanding because I've spent, obviously, I've spent thousands of hours in meditation. I know meditation,
yeah,
yeah. So when I see that picture, you have perfectly captured that moment when you're about 20 minutes in and everything is still and there's like a latent energy permeating everything and a peace. The look of peace on that guy's face, but it's the colors as well. I just relate to it. That's just outstanding card. Please carry on.
thank you. The next card I have is Sphinx. This is about the teaching of the four powers of the Sphinx. Some people call it the witch's pyramid: to know, to will, to dare, and to be silent. So yeah, I talk about that in there. I really wanted to, because I know that there's different terms for that set of ideas. Some people call it the four powers of the Magus. Four powers of the Magus, the witch's pyramid, the four powers of the Sphinx. I basically wanted to go with the Sphinx because I wanted to do a painting of a Sphinx. It's straightforward as that. Yeah, so in this entry, I literally just talk about the four powers and how useful they are for a lot of us, and how much wisdom is in there, even though it's quite deceptively simple. Initially you might think, oh yeah, it's to know, to will, to dare, to be silent, but you can really get a lot of wisdom from those four simple instructions.
I couldn't agree more. And it's one of the hardest things to manage when you are enthusiastic about these subjects. It's so difficult, but there is a balance to be struck there. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we move on next to the Star Goddess.
Yep. So we have Star Goddess.
With stars for eyes there.
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, so the Star Goddess. This card is a part of the group that is dedicated to deities and spirits, and I felt that the Star Goddess is an aspect of the goddess that should get some coverage in this book, because in traditional Wicca there are some liturgical references to the Star Goddess, and a lot of it is inspired by, or arguably some of it comes from Nuit or Nut and her place in Thelema. And then there's also references to the Star Goddess in the Anderson fairy tradition from America, which also probably has, I believe, has a Thelemic inspiration there as well. So I definitely wanted to include this more kind of cosmic aspect of the goddess that transcends Mother Earth and actually goes out into the stars. And this card is very much in alignment with the star in the tarot. That's something I didn't mention earlier, is that for every single card entry, I do note particular tarot cards that I feel are in alignment with each card. So if you're using this deck alongside a tarot reading, and I love to use oracle cards alongside tarot readings, it's very interesting to note if there's a connection with the cards you get from here and the tarot.
I immediately thought of Noet or Nuit, the embodiment of the the night sky and the Milky Way, the arched back, that kind of thing. But so we move to the Watchers. I'm very interested in this one as well, actually. I just read a book about this subject, actually, called Egyptian Origins of the Nephilim. Is that what you're getting at there with the Watchers, the Nephilim, the fallen, almost like fallen stars or fallen spirits that teach and breed with the daughters of man and this kind of thing?
Yeah, so that's exactly what this card is about. So I included this because again, this falls under the deities and spirits section.
Yeah.
I include this because the whole legend of the Watchers is a very foundational myth that was really inspirational for some branches of modern witchcraft, particularly the ones that call themselves traditional. So the first time I personally came across this myth and its relation to witchcraft is probably the same way that a lot of people do, and it was through reading Paul Hewson's classic book Mastering Witchcraft, and he actually opens the book with a recounting of this tale of the Watchers, because there's in the Book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal text which was edited out of the Bible, but it's still considered part of the Catholic Bible, I think. Or you can purchase it in Catholic bookshops, so they still give some kind of credence to the Book of Enoch. But in that tale of the Watchers, the angels that are the fallen angels that mate with the daughters of man, there's actually descriptions of them teaching witchcraft and magic to the people, as well as teaching makeup and metallurgy.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah. You remind me. Yeah, I did read about it. And there was in this book as well. There was I want to highlight this book actually for for that miserable Welsh git who wrote it, Mog. It's such a good book. I really want everyone out there who's even vaguely interested to know this book exists. It kind of blew my mind actually, because there is something about the gods of a previous epoch, like giants buried in the ground, fallen from the sky, influencing the temple rituals. You got to read it to get I can't really describe it, but I just get it. So I'll put a picture on the screen. And sorry, carry on.
I just wanted to say that I always the story of the Watchers was never particularly instrumental for me personally, or the traditions that I have practiced. But I do, every time I look into it, I always remember how fascinating it is. And it's just, there's something really cool about it. I love the fact that, like, I've heard correlations with different cultures, and lots of people saying, how when you look into the pagan mythologies of lots of cultures, they have this concept of an ancient race of giants, the more primordial beings that were the original gods, if you like, or the oldest gods, and how some of those myths have been tied in, even with like Celtic legends. I've heard of witchcraft traditions that think of some of the beings in Celtic mythology, especially like Bran the Blessed. Some people have linked him with watchers, and I find all of that really fascinating. Anything that touches on like the really most ancient origins of civilization, and I love that stuff.
I'm with you. I think Lovecraft was tapping into this as well, with this sort of the Cthulhu in the deep and all that. But yeah, carry on, mate.
The next card is Land Spirits. So this is just talking about working with spirits of the land. There's a section in the guidebook where I talk about, I give some tips on if you're planning on doing ritual work outdoors, just some sensible things to bear in mind. Like, getting to know the lay of the land before you go there at night to do a ritual. I was taught that lesson really early on by my very first witchcraft teacher. She told me a story about how her and her coven had gone on holiday. I think they were in Anglesey, and they'd all got out and got drunk one night, and they decided to do an impromptu little circle dance and a bit of a ritual outdoors. And the next day they were walking where they had been, and they saw their footprints, and they said, "Oh, this is where we were last night, where we were dancing, pissed off, out of our skulls." And they're looking at their footprints, and they're noticing the footprints getting closer and closer and closer to the edge of a cliff that they didn't even know was there.
Oh.
So, it's always a good idea to get your bearings and see the place in daylight before you go there. But I also,
Absolutely. Yeah.
sorry, I
Do you know,
also just
I
talk a
want to,
little.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, my friend, we're butting in on each other because we're so enthusiastic. I just want to say that as someone, I have a very niche and unique insight into sleeping in different locations in the countryside
Hmm.
over about 4.5 years now. And I can tell you, if you're in the van, you imagine like the van is like like the skull, yeah? And you
Hmm.
have your, obviously all senses are internal apparatus that are picking up information from the outside. So you can see a parallel there between being in the same space, but that's, you know, that space moves around to different locations. So it's the same walls, it's the same floor and everything, but there's something different to be tuned into outside of the van. So there's one
Mm.
particular place, well, there's two actually, but there's one that is so extreme. And I mean, like, I really look forward to what's going to happen next when I sleep at this particular place, because to call it haunted is just taking the piss. It doesn't even go far enough, you
Hmm.
know. So and yeah, in quite some horrific ways actually, to be honest, but nonetheless to weirdos like us, we find that inspirational. So
Mm.
sorry, I butted in there, so please do carry on.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I was going to say, I bet you've had some really interesting experiences with all of those nights that you've spent, sleeping out, in the countryside. I've not done any outdoor ritual for quite a few years, but which relates to what I said before about being more, not being able to get out as much. But I've had some very cool, eerie, experiences in some of the places I like to go to. And I talk a little bit about that in the book, about how it's good protocol to leave some physical offerings as well, as long as it's biodegradable and everything, to show respect to the
Definitely.
land, and how it can make a huge difference if you've
Yeah,
ever been in a ritual outdoors and nobody's acknowledged the land spirits. Things can really go haywire, if you
definitely. I mean, you
haven't paid
think
your respect.
the only reason my channel exists, the only reason I started it, is because I had something to say, and that was the folklore legend of the ghost of Bluebell Hill is real. It's experientially real, but she's not a ghost. So that was my essential. That's the reason why I began
Yeah.
recording. Obviously, you know, a very. I mean, I guess you reach that stage where you're so convinced that it feels like a tragedy not to, you know, to speak. But
Mm.
so where are we now? The lands onto ancestors, which is also related,
Ancestors.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Now, this I can definitely say there was. I actually forgotten this, but this burial mound here is definitely inspired by. Now, I'm going to pronounce it how I think is the correct way, but I've been told different ways to pronounce this name. Um,
Mhm.
Bryn Kelly the, but I've also heard it being called Bryn Kethly D, but I think it's Bryn Kelly the. And
Okay.
it's a burial mound on the Isle of Anglesey. I used to. I have known two witches who have also been involved with the Anglesey Druid Order. So there's been a couple of occasions, quite a few years ago now, where I had the opportunity of going to this site. Once on the summer solstice. In fact, it may have been the summer solstice on both occasions. I can't remember. But there's always a gathering there, that people are welcome to go to. So this is a burial mound, obviously a skull. This is all for this card. I go into some of the common um, questions that are raised around working with ancestors, common concerns and queries that people make about whether they are for or against it, and then tips on how to do some ancestral work. Quite straightforward, really.
Interesting.
Next, I have Baphomet. There's nothing that I have to say about Baphomet that you won't have heard before. It's all very the standard information I provided about him, but I felt that he's such an iconic image, and very much, it inspires a lot of witches. So I felt he definitely needed to be included.
Definitely. I think I will just add in a little bit of personal opinion here, and based on experience, but also influence from people wiser than me. And there is a notion in the air, floating around with a certain group of people, that Baphomet is unknowable by his very nature, because it is too vast. But I will say that I did pick up a sense of every single human and animal reciprocal relationship across time. There was a hint of that there for me, so I'll just drop that one in if anyone's interested to contemplate that. And we move on to a lady who's quite a mystery to me, actually. I'm not quite sure who this Babylon lady is.
So Babylon, from Thelema, or who's based on the with Crowley's Thelema, we've got the Scarlet Woman. So I talk about the origin, the original appearance she makes as the whore of Babylon in Revelations, and then I talk about Jack Parsons' work. Anyone who's familiar with The Red Goddess by Peter Gray. I give a lot of the the same kind of details that you find in there. And I felt it was important to include Babylon because I find it fascinating that the work that Jack Parsons did with Marjorie Cameron. Was it called the Babylon? Yeah, the Babylon Working. First of all, it's just a really fascinating story because it involves L. Ron Hubbard, and it involves a load of crazy shit going on.
Yeah.
It's just such a fantastic story that's actually real. And then the weird correlations between what happened with them and John Dee and Edward Kelly. And also the fact that Babylon, I don't personally work with Babylon, but I felt that she's relevant to the spirit of modern witchcraft again, because around the time that Jack Parsons was channeling these messages about the witchcraft and creating a tradition that was very focused on her, that was around the same time that Wicca was kind of taking off in the UK. And it's just interesting that there was something in the air, there was something of the witch current being expressed, and for whatever reason at that time in history, around the 1940s, there were small pockets of people that were feeling really drawn to calling themselves witches and to having some kind of ritualistic, outdoors-based, goddess-worshipping, secret witch cult. And I find that really fascinating. And I definitely think that there's something to Babylon as a figure, and that she's... because of my personal theology, I see all deities as aspects of an ultimate oneness. So I definitely see Babylon as a face of the goddess,
Absolutely. And when I say I'm not sure who she is, it's obviously I know the name, I'm familiar with where she can be found, but I've never really understood her. To me, in a way, it's like, if this red-headed lady appears in your dreams, is it this notion of the whore as well? It's like, is that good or is that bad? And that just means I need to do some further research, which may be quite enjoyable. Who knows?
I definitely think that for a lot of people she's mysterious. A lot of people aren't sure. Like a lot of people aren't sure how to take this.
Where does it fit in? It's in a way, maybe it's the Christian roots of our society. There's a bit of a taboo there. It's like, how does a sexually promiscuous woman How is that a part of the spiritual, process? As you say, they're all one. How does that tie in? But there must be a reason there, and I'm just not sure what that is. So we
Yeah, I
moved.
would.
We yeah. Sorry, my friend. Carry on.
All I was going to say is I would
Yeah.
definitely say for people who are new to hearing about Babylon, the Red Goddess by Peter Gray is considered a kind of classic for a lot of
Mm,
people to have an introduction there. But yeah, when it comes to like very sexual female spiritual beings, I can think of a few. Like there's Red Tara in Tibetan Buddhism, Kurukula, and the Morrigan as well, which has a very sexual side, and there's that connection with the color red as well. Um, but yeah, there are quite a few beings and topics in this deck, like Baphomet as well. As I said, Baphomet and Babylon. I've never personally done any work with either of these beings, um, but because this deck isn't about me, I felt the need to include them as well, and to give them their pay them their due respects, kind of thing. And yeah, we're on to the last card now, which is Great
yep.
Goddess. And this is an exploration of the how impactful and how important the concept of the Great Goddess is in the modern witchcraft movement, particularly in Wicca, but lots of other traditions of the craft also revere or place great respect on a very big female spirit, whether she's
Mm,
described as a goddess or not. Because even some of the other traditions, and I actually talk about this in the guidebook. I give a bit of Wiccan theology, and talk about uh, what has inspired the Wiccan goddess, like the some of Robert Graves' ideas, and Margaret Murray's witchcraft theories, about witchcraft being a cult that worshipped a moon goddess and a horn god. And I talk about a bit about non-dualism and the idea that the goddess, because there's a lot of people that really hate the concept of the goddess, I've noticed. Um,
mm.
but
It's
the
funny
the fact,
because she's so easy to love. You get these sort of Catholic guys who sort of fawn over the Virgin, the image of the.
Mhm.
She's so easy to love. She's that archetypal, you know, uh, when you think of things like childbirth and taking care of children, and to me, it conjures sort of the image of the love of Isis towards Osiris as well. The fact that she rescues him, that's all kind of
yeah,
interwoven. Yeah, I find it strange that anyone would not be very inspired by that.
yeah. I think that in the kind of pagan world at the moment, and it feels like it has been the case for a few years, is polytheism seems to be all the rage, like hard polytheism, like not,
Mm,
and also what would I call it? Like reconstructionist paths. So there's a lot of people who are very concerned with doing everything as correctly as they can, and it's all about individual gods and goddesses. And a lot of people, one of the criticisms or things that some people don't like about Wicca is that there is that theology there of a singular divine feminine who is expressed by many different forms.
mm.
For some reason, I think it's because it's too monotheistic for some people and they don't like that. But really,
Perhaps,
it's
yeah.
something.
Perhaps, yeah.
It's a concept I've always vibed really well with, and it's something you find in ancient Hindu traditions, and you find it in the cult of Isis. They treated Isis as the great mother, and all goddesses were Isis. But some people, for some reason, I've noticed have kind of want to discredit that in some way. But yeah,
Mm,
I include her because for a lot of people at the very beginning of the modern witchcraft movement, it was actually goddess worship that was the massive thing that pulled them towards it. Like with Gerald Gardner, some of those first early Gardnerian witches that were seeking out, writing letters to Gerald Gardner and trying to get initiated, these were people who had had a lot of the time, or in some cases at least, they were so drawn to this vision of witchcraft because it involved goddess worship, and they'd always felt, or had at least previously had some kind of experience of the divine as feminine, and which Gerald Gardner's covens were the only place that really that you could get a piece of that. You know, if you were living in England in the 1950s, there weren't many other options back then.
Mm.
So it was, you know, and the goddess for many people, including myself, was the big pull to modern witchcraft. So yeah, she's like one of the most important cards in the deck for me.
Absolutely.
So
And
that's all of the images, by the way, as well.
okay, mate, and very eloquently put, and you did well there, a tour de
Thank
force.
you.
And we'll take a little break now before we come back for the last section. And question 11 is, quoting from your website again, a fairly terrifying week-long series of evocation rites in the 17th century mill house. Interesting. Can you share a little more on that?
Yeah. So I don't think I don't think I'll give the name of the person because I mean this person has now passed away.
Yeah.
And his family are still around, and yeah, basically, when I was about, I think I was about 22. I was in my very early 20s. I think I mentioned earlier that I used to work in Manchester. Used to have this occult shop called New Aeon Books, and it lasted for about, actually, funnily enough, that went on for about 22 years, and I worked there towards the end of its life, this shop. A few years before the shop closed down, I still used to, go there a lot as a customer, and I had friends there and was connected with some magical groups and everything. And I had an opportunity. It would have been the very early 2000s. I had an opportunity to go on something called a magical retreat, and I'd never done anything like this, and it sounded quite nice. Going on a magical retreat somewhere, and it would involve staying in this mill house. It was actually in Derbyshire. Staying in a mill house for a few days. I think it was 5 days, and it was going to be the trip. The whole trip was headed by this guy that in Manchester at the time. He in the occult scene, he was very much had a big reputation as like, oh, he's a serious magician guy, and he used to have this big white beard. Some people used to describe him as like an evil Santa Claus. And he'd been involved in, as I say, I won't say his name. I'm sure some people that, who, if anyone sees this, who's been in the occult UK kind of community, they'll probably know who I'm talking about. But yeah, I didn't know a lot about him, but I'd seen him over the years, coming into the shop because he was very close with the original owners. But he did have like this very, Crowley, old school, quite dark kind of vibe to him. He could be quite scary, but he could also be very lovely as well if you were respectful and everything. But he was doing this magical retreat, and I actually decided to go along to it. And I was the youngest person there, and there was a bunch of like Thelemites there, and a few witches and people from different magical backgrounds, and it was quite terrifying. It was hardcore. When I look back on it, there's not a lot that I can share about it because even though it was so long ago and like several of the people have passed away, that's still just, out of respect, I feel that I should be, quite secretive about some of the stuff that happened. But, I can say things that, I can say that we had to, I remember that I had to wear my robe for the entire week that we were there. So it was kind of like a monastic experience. And we would get up at like 5 or 6 in the morning to meditate for an hour. And then we would do several rituals a day, and it was all stuff that this guy had planned. And a lot of it at the time for me, as somebody who had been, at that point, I'd probably been involved in magic for at least 5 years, I'd say. But this was the first time that I was like with people that were more at the kind of ceremonial magic end of things rather than the witchcraft. Yeah, it was just very hardcore, and it involved like Enochian entities and demons, and a lot of stuff was going over my head. And I went through a lot of different emotions and feelings during that time. I had moments where I thought, I actually couldn't believe it, but I actually found myself thinking, is this magic thing for me? Because these people, some of the people here are seriously weird people.
Yeah.
And then I had moments of and then I had moments of complete elation where I felt really blissed out as well. So even though I didn't understand a lot of what was going on at that time, I look back on that now, and I really do feel that that was a very initiatory experience. Like some of the people I met in that retreat, I would know and work magically with for quite a long time after, like one person over a decade of work after. And I think I also like to remind myself now and again of that time, because in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you were into magic, it really was a weird thing, and there were genuinely quite scary people involved that you would be rubbing shoulders with, and some people that genuinely disturbed me. And I did have to do things that I wasn't totally comfortable with, and I really was out, putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And nowadays, especially I can't speak to the occult as a whole, but I feel like nowadays in the witchcraft world, things have been so watered down and reduced, and there's a lot of maybe too much emphasis on only do this if you're really comfortable with it, and be really comfortable all the time. And I think that we've really lost some bite that magic used to have, back in the 90s and before then. And I sometimes have memories about that time to remind myself of what magic can be like, and just to kind of put things into perspective, I think.
Absolutely. Do you find, I mean, we're all on Facebook, right? But there's something sanitizing about that. It's like, you stop for a few minutes at work or whatever and you scroll, and it's just these really important subjects are being debased, one, movement of the hand after another, and it all starts to feel almost normal. And there's times I say to myself, God, like I want to just think about anything. You always go back to it. If it's your favorite thing, you always come back to it. But like sometimes it's like, God, I need a moment just to cleanse your cleanse card, just to cleanse myself of the normality of or the the pressing of normality upon this thing, which is absolutely not normal. And the reason I asked, the first question I asked people is, when did you discover the occult is a real thing? I've had some people say to me, like, what kind of question is that? Like, it's everything. Of course it's but to some of us, it's especially that typical cliche of the Western mindset and all that. It's not supposed to be real. It's not supposed to exist. And I've never gotten over it, and I don't think I will ever get over it. Like every experience that you just sit there and you're like, fuck, this is real. And it just, I mean, I will never get over the fact that it is real. And it was those times in the 90s and early 2000s and that, when you couldn't really talk to anyone about it, it seemed less likely to be real as well, and that made it even more intriguing. But we'll move on to the next question anyway, which is it sounds like a fascinating character and a very formative experience there. It just makes you wonder how many people are just sort of lost to history because there wasn't YouTube around or anything, and these amazing mysterious characters that are just legends now. So number 12, you also mentioned some early childhood mystical experiences on your page. I think I've made a typo here in my own text. The god or goddess, something like that. I've missed out the S. Is God or the goddess something you can talk about? Obviously, you've already talked about the goddess, but if we sort of take into consider, actually, there's more to the question. Maybe describe your shock, as we were just talking about, or complete acceptance of these experiences. How does one integrate them into the wider practice? These are taboo subjects in the UK, but the more of us that speak up about them, the better. So obviously, as you engage in these practices, I mean, I found if to investigate paganism, it's always a bit like you talked about earlier. It's going to draw you up. It's going to draw you up to the notion of, big G. And obviously that has Christian baggage, but it doesn't need to, because you might say, obviously you can't prove anything directly, but it is an inference that, big G, or whatever you want to call it, exists. So maybe you could sort of give your opinion on that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I had a very secular upbringing. I was christened in a form of Protestantism, but I literally was never taught anything about Christianity, pretty much. And at school that I went to, I learned more about other religions, other world religions, than I did about Christianity. And religion, spirituality, all of that stuff just wasn't really spoken about in my home background. Whenever I, as a kid, went to Spain, because my half of my family is from Spain, obviously you see Catholicism everywhere there, but I didn't really understand a lot about it. I did, like the images of Mother Mary that I was seeing, but I didn't really understand it. And for me, when I was, I mentioned earlier about being a high school librarian and, investigating like astral projection and things like that. It was all for me around that time, around puberty, basically. All of this magical and spiritual stuff started kicking off for me. And it was around being a very young teenager. What used to happen was I would have these moments where it would happen very frequently. I'd have moments where it would feel like time would stand still, and I would just gaze out of the window. I was always like one of those kids that had my head in the clouds, and I would just find myself thinking about how vast the universe is. I would have like this series of realizations that happened, and it always happened in the same way. So time would feel like it would stand still. I would look out the window or just around me, wherever I was, and I would have this immense feeling of, wow, the universe is really massive. And then I would think, wow, we're all connected to it. And even though it's so massive and we're all even though it's so huge and vast, because we are all connected, there's also an intimacy to it as well. And I would just feel really, really aware of a great cosmic loving being that was controlling the whole thing. And I was a part of it. And it didn't matter how vast the universe was. It gave a shit about me in a really personal, intimate way, just as it did about everything else. And it would often make me feel a bit misty-eyed. It might make me tear up a bit. I would get full-on bliss. I'd get goosebumps all over my body. And I would have that experience, and it would usually last for a few seconds, maybe a minute or two. And I would have that experience like once a day for about 2 years, sometimes more than once a day. And I knew that it was the divine, but this was all around the same time that I was just discovering and falling in love with modern paganism and Wicca. And I very quickly, the very first book that I read, I heard about the concept of the goddess, and something clicked instantly, and I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to call it. That totally makes sense, because God as a concept, I'd never, I didn't really jive. Because I didn't know anything about Christianity, I could only go off my feelings, and all I felt from people when I saw them praying just didn't feel that it didn't have any. It just didn't do anything for me. All I was aware of with the Christians at the time that I knew was I just felt a sense of judgmentalism from them. Even though at the time I couldn't pinpoint what it was, I realize now there was something patronizing and judgmental about them that I know that I felt. And praying Christian prayer, or the kind of Christian prayer you would do at school, like saying thank you for your dinner, just didn't do anything for me. Absolutely nothing. But the idea of a divine goddess, particularly mother, just totally made sense. And the idea that it was all connected and it was all in the natural world. So I started worship. I came to, when I discovered paganism and modern witchcraft, I'd already realized as a teenager at this point that I was looking for some kind of religion or spirituality. And at the time, I knew that it couldn't be Christianity, because I felt that I wouldn't have had a place in there as a gay person. Because at the time I wasn't aware that there are, of course, plenty of forms of Christianity that are actually cool with gay people. But at the time, the only alternatives I was aware of as a kid in the 90s would be like Eastern traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism. But then, so I was thinking maybe I was going to have to look more into that. I was planning on doing, looking into yoga, for example. But then at that point, I discovered from the story I told earlier about going to a shop that turned out to be a pagan shop, I discovered paganism and Wicca and began practicing straight away. And then from there, those feelings that I was having, the blissed out experiences, those just became more intense. And I was just very, very focused on worshipping the goddess. And the witches there at the shop who became my first teacher, they were all I think everyone back then was very into the idea of having a patron deity. So I thought that I needed to have a patron goddess. And I prayed to the great goddess and asked if there's a specific goddess out there, could you make yourself known to me so I can have a devotional relationship with you? And it was probably 2 days after I'd made this prayer that I found a really large pewter silver-coated ankh with a winged Isis in the center. I just found it.
What, just like on the road?
I found it in a like a cupboard in a school that I had to go to a class to, and it was like abandoned. It was just it was like a junk room. And I saw it and I knew that it was for me, and I didn't have any qualms about taking it. So yeah, I robbed it basically.
No doubt it was for you. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and it was like I'd asked for a sign and I was delivered this huge ankh with a pewter Isis. And I'd only just heard about Isis from my first witchcraft teacher. There was a book at the time that was on the shelves called I think it's called The Mysteries of Isis by De Tracy Regular, her Worship and Mysteries or something, or I can't remember. It's Isis, Goddess of 10,000 Names. I had the goddess Isis was the first specific deity that I ever reached out to. Before that, it was just the goddess. And I've always considered Isis I've always had a special connection with Isis. I have a huge tattoo of her on my arm. And she's been like the biggest inspiration for me. Isis has always had a mention in my prayers ever since then. But obviously over the years, I've worked with various different deities and beings. But yeah, I'm very much consider myself to be a monist. Like I see myself, I believe in divine oneness, and I believe all gods and goddesses are different facets of that great diamond. So that kind of theology that you find like with a lot of Hindu sects, that's basically how I see things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just feeling awash with extreme concurrence there on pretty much everything you said. Yeah, it's and what sticks out most is that notion of a supreme intelligence that gives a shit about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's probably one of the hardest hurdles when you think about how it doesn't make sense of the world entire. I mean, you can never fully tackle the question of evil and all this kind of thing. But when you're presented with that inner knowing, whether it's a brief experience or not, yeah, I completely concur with you. And it's what's the point in doing all this if you're not headed that way? I mean, where do you want to end up? Like in the abyss? Some people would say, yeah, just give me a surfboard in hell. I'll ride the flames listening to Slayer for 10 million years. But do you but do you really? Would you really? I don't think you would. As much as great as Slayer are, don't get me wrong. I I said to my ex-wife, obviously talking about our divorce, I said you should have known when you met me and you walked into my flat and you saw every Slayer album in the order of the year that they were released on my shelf. You should have known. You should have known. So so we move to question 13.
Okay.
I would ask the audience to also check out the review of your cards by YouTuber Kelly Ann Maddox, which I watched the other day. It's a great video. Where can one find you and your cards? And does your YouTube channel still exist? I couldn't find it recently, and I used to listen to your YouTube channel years back. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you. So, yeah, the YouTube channel, I haven't uploaded a video on there for about 5 years or so, but it is still there. I made a lot of my older videos private. The last few videos that I used to upload with any kind of regularity were when for a couple of years I did maybe it wasn't for a few months anyway, I was doing tarot readings um, for the month ahead for all the different zodiac signs. So there's a load of those videos there. I think I kept my video on scrying because for some reason that video got thousands of views. I don't know where it was shared, but it was the
Yeah,
most viewed video I ever made.
that's how I found your
But yeah,
channel years ago. That video
oh, was that it?
brought me to your channel. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so the channel is called Rodriguez Mystic. Two separate words, Rodriguez Mystic. So it should still be there. And I keep
Okay.
thinking for about 5 years now, I've said to myself, oh, I'll make some more videos, but I have like some kind of resistance to making videos, but I do want to try and maybe get back into it because I do miss it. I do miss making videos. But yeah, everything about booking a reading with me or buying my Oracle deck, all the details can be found on my website, which is just my full name, SethDavidRodriguez.com. And on there you can find links to my Oracle deck and my book. They're sold through different sites. It's all self-published. It's the only way I could do it, really. And also, I use Instagram a lot. It's probably my main social media platform, which is Seth David Rodriguez Mystic, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I've got a link to that on my website as well. So all the website, everything can be found on there, basically.
Oh, okay, mate. I'm not sure what happened then. Maybe I was just searching your name. I forgot the name of the channel, Rodriguez Mystic. So if you send me, the 2 or 3 links so people can find everything that you are, everything that you do. If they want to buy the cards, they can do that. If they want a tarot reading, they can contact you. So that takes care of the last question, which was concerning how someone can sit with you and have a reading. And you've been an absolute star. And
Thank you.
I just want to say thanks very much. And it's been very interesting. And so I guess unless there's anything else you want to add to the end of the interview, I'll close up.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Yeah, I don't get to talk as much about this stuff with many people at the moment. So yeah, any opportunity I get, I love it.
Okay, my friend. Okay, so all that takes to say is Seth David Rodriguez, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you
Take
very
care, my
much.
friend. Take care of yourself.
Take care. Bye.
Temperance has been achieved. And there was just one little thing we forgot to come back to, and those were my amateur major arcana tarot set that I created. Nowhere near the level and extent that we discussed with Seth tonight. Yeah, temperance has been achieved with a large doping. I'm losing the power of speech, as if that would ever happen. With a large dollop of fascinating details there down below if you would like to donate to the channel, which is my way of saying if you would like to kindly donate to my Time in the Sunshine Fund. Leave that with you, and take care.